Well, welcome to the citation modules. Basically, what we're going to do is there's two videos that you'll watch. One's called In-Text Citations, and the other is called Works Cited and Resources. And hopefully these will help you feel a little bit more comfortable with doing citations and works cited and finding things for your pre. So if you ever have any questions, feel free to email me, or you can get a hold of Susan too. She's a lot of help, I promise. So let's get started. A long time ago, in a galaxy far, far away, it is a dark time for the English 2010 students. Although their pre-topics have been chosen, citation enforcers have driven them from the corners of their cyberspace and pursued them across the internet, crying plagiarism and demanding Fs. Evading the dreaded citation enforcers, the group of weary academic seekers of higher knowledge, led by Susan Pastiche-Robel, have discovered a new secret way to combat and defeat the ominous in-text citations. So the basics. Rule number 1, everything must be cited. Everything must be cited. Let me repeat it again. Everything must be cited. This includes thoughts, ideas, anything that is not your own has to have a citation. Rule number 2, when in doubt, cite it. Don't be this guy. No. So quotations are the most common thing that is cited or is used in papers. Quotations have to be identical to the source and match it word for word, and then the citation will actually be attributed to the author. So if you look at the bottom, you'll see in the parentheses that it says Lester 46 to 47. That's basically how you'll do one, and we'll go into that a little bit more. You don't want to quote a lot, you just want to take what's going to help build your argument and not take away from it. The easiest thing to remember is that less is more in this case. And then explain your quotations and how it builds on your argument or relates to it. The worst thing you can do is drop and run, and that's when you leave it at the end of a paragraph or you never explain it. So it just kind of sticks out, and it will really jar your reader quite a bit. So remember, what you quote you have to explain, which will also help be an incentive for you to quote less. So this example at the bottom, you can see that it's a long quote, so it would have been better to cut some out or to do one of the other two options, which is to paraphrase or summarize. And one thing to really remember, that if it's more than 4 sentences, they call that a block quotation, and you actually have to indent it with a 1-inch on the, let me think, hold on the left-hand side of the page, and then you won't actually use quotation marks. Instead, you'll put parentheses and the page number after the period. And on to paraphrasing. Paraphrasing is basically just putting a passage from the source of material into your own words. But the one thing that you want to make sure is that you're only slightly condensing the quote or the section that you're using, just because it's a little bit more than summarizing, and we'll talk about summarizing in just a second. So if you look at the bottom example below, it still gives all of the information, but it doesn't give it word for word. So if you look at it in a 3-step process, you basically have quoting, paraphrasing, and then summarizing. So summarizing is the second way that you can use sources, and that's basically just taking the idea and putting it into your own words, and then you still actually will give credit to the source. But the summaries are a lot shorter than the original, but they still will actually give a broader overview of the source material, so it's focusing on the idea more than the words. So you can see in the example how it's a lot less than that quote. Okay, so now that we've talked about the ways that you can convey the information that you have from your sources, you have to cite it. Rule number 1. So to do an in-text citation, what you'll basically do is you'll follow the author page style, which is the MLA. The one thing to be aware of is a lot of people will put a comma in between the author and the page number. However, that is a Chicago formatting and not an MLA formatting. So make sure that you're not doing that. And then if there isn't an author for your book or your article or your source, what you'll want to do is you'll use a shortened condensed title of it. And that'll just be like something that it's easy for the reader to identify your source as. So you can see from the example, you'll have My Father is Darth Vader, and then that's a shorter version of My Father is Darth Vader, Luke Skywalker's Realization and Coping Strategies. So just remember that books, movies, songs, and song albums are italicized. And then articles, chapters in books, and short stories are always in quotations. Novellas, I didn't put them on there because a lot of people don't use novellas, but they can go either way just for your Gee Whiz books. And then the other thing to remember is that even though you're using a short and condensed version for your citation, the works cited page will actually have the entire title of the article. So if you want to use an author tag, what that does is that introduces the author so you won't have to put it in your citation too. And one thing about that is it's really nice for the reader to have that so that it makes it more clear that you're talking about a source instead of presenting it as your own idea. So pay attention to that. If you don't introduce the author or if it's a little bit unclear in the sentence, then your citation will look like that second example. And that's okay to use. You can do it either way. It just depends on how you're transitioning and exploring the argument. Author tags are, like I said before, are the easiest and clearest way to basically bring in another person's thoughts and make it obvious that it's not your own. So an example of this would be the Darth Vader's article that's on this slide. You'll introduce the author, so in this case Darth Vader, by their first and last name, and the article, who's your daddy, and within the first few words in the sentence. That basically just establishes that you're bringing in someone else and makes it less confusing for the reader than if you were to put it at the end of the sentence. And then after you've introduced them, what you'll want to do is just refer to them by last name. I've seen a lot of people who have referred to them by gender, and the gender doesn't quite, it works, but it brings in a little bit of bias, and it can sometimes be wrong. So the easiest way is just to use the last name, and you'll do that until you hit a different source. So at the end of that paragraph, I have the Vader 168. And then if I were to bring in another article, I would use another author tag. But then if I want to go back and talk about Vader's article, would basically say that. I'd say in Vader's article discussed above, it's a different issue or something to that effect. The one thing you want to be sure is you don't have too many author tags because that can get confusing for the reader, but you also want to be aware that you're raising awareness to your reader that you are using an author tag. So it's kind of a fine balance to use. Punctuation with in-text citations can be really confusing. Even I have a hard time with this still. So basically the easiest thing to remember is that the period always goes on the outside of the parentheses. So in that sentence you can see that it has Skywalker 46 parenthesis period. That's kind of the standard way to do it. Even if that had been a full sentence, that if it had said Luke was kind of surprised to learn that Leia was in fact his sister, you wouldn't put the period there and then put another period. Basically, that end period covers all the punctuation. Question marks are a little bit different, but they're kind of tricky, so I would probably just recommend staying away from them. If you do have to use one, you'll put the question mark on the inside of the quotation and then a period on the outside of it. And then if you're quoting dialogue, it's best if you use single quotations. And so what you'll have is you can see in that example that Han Solo is saying he really liked Leia, and you're quoting Han Solo. So what Han Solo says goes in single quotations, and then what you're quoting from the quote, if that makes sense, goes in double quotations.